Okay, everyone, welcome. It is 12 noon here, Central Standard Time in Oklahoma City. I hope everyone's doing well on this hump day of the week. We're going to get started here. I always promise to keep these things as concise as I can because I know you're busy, and actually I am too. So anyway, for those of you who are on the line now, it looks like we have 10 of you here. Welcome. I always mention at the outset, if you do have any questions or anything, in the left-hand window there's a chat screen, chat entry box that you can type your message into, and you can see, or I can see what you're putting in there. I go in and check it every now and then. And especially if you see me talking like this and you're not hearing anything, that's really good to let me know about. We are recording this session, and I typically have these posted up on YouTube later in the afternoon, as well as the slides from today. So I'm going to go ahead and go into full screen mode here on the presentation, and we will get started. Today's topic is going to be about the low-hanging fruit of test automation. What do we automate first? And I picked this topic because I get it quite often. I get it in questions at conferences and when I'm talking with clients. And so just a quick bio about me. If you joined the webinar and you don't know who in the world this is talking, my name's Randy Rice. I've got over 35 years in development and testing, over 25 years specifically in testing in QA. I'm an ASTQB certified tester, both foundation and advanced level full. And that reminds me, I'll be at the ASTQB conference next week in San Francisco, talking on free and cheap tools. That's a popular topic, one that I talk on. It's going to be a day-long tutorial, and we're going to go not only into all the cool free and cheap tools that are out there, but also then how to build a framework using some of those tools. Now, if you want to reach me, Google is actually making it harder for you to do that these days. They've shaken up the search algorithm, so if you do a search for Randy Rice or Rice Consulting, you'll be fine. But my two websites, riceconsulting.com is my main website, or my blog, randallrice.blogspot.com, is typically where I put the links to the webinar and to the slides after the session. So I'm really honored that you guys are here today, and like I say, I'm going to keep this to 30 minutes, I believe, today. I don't have just tons of slides to show. I have about 14 different things that you might want to look at to determine if something is a good place to start your test automation. Basically, the scenario works out like this. If someone buys a test tool and they have an objective for that tool, that they want to automate a particular project or a particular application, and during the demo all looks good, during the evaluation things look good, but then you start using the tool and you start running into these problematic issues of being able to automate the application. Sometimes the tool just will not recognize an object, or you may be dealing with software that you have developed your own objects in your own organization. My friend Frank Rowland has a good way of saying this: quirky software leads to quirky test automation, and that's really true. Non-standard software can be a real problem. So the very first thing that I look at is it feasible to automate what you want to automate? And I first ask, is it easy? But more than that, is it even feasible to do this? There's also kind of this percentage of automation that a lot of people have in their expectations that they would like to automate like 100% of all their testing, which is typically unreasonable. Most people would be happy or so. And in fact, there's some testing that you really don't want to automate. But think about things that are non-standard objects, objects that have dynamic attributes like session IDs that you have to pass between, on a website, between page to page, where you may be testing something that has streaming dynamic data like stock exchange kind of applications. Or perhaps the tool just doesn't handle a certain type of object or component. There's also the special case of commercial off-the-shelf software that you don't know what the changes are going to be later, and I think I'll mention a little bit more about that coming up. But it's not unusual for a vendor to make drastic architectural changes to their applications in a new release, and if you have a lot of investment in automation, then that can really be a problem for you. So the second thing is control. And the big thing is here, who controls or develops the application? Did the vendor develop the entire application? Did you develop part of it? And now, as we're seeing with software as a service, I would say that's extremely risky to try to automate because you don't even know when it changes. There may be a few things you may want to automate to give you some leverage there. But you have to ask, well, how stable is the code? How many hot fixes and maintenance releases are we getting? And if you are getting a number of these, do you know when they occur and do you have the control to apply them? Sometimes they just get applied automatically. And all of a sudden you notice all of your test automation breaking now because of these updates that the vendor felt like you just really needed. And so the prior knowledge of the change, as well as the control of it, really is a big deal. It's interesting, some vendors that I've worked with, they have problems even creating and distributing their own release notes, even to their own testers. So sometimes that can be even an in-house problem to the developer. And so if the developer doesn't even know what's changed, then you're certainly going to have a challenge in that as well. And so even though, yes, some of the tools that are object-oriented and object-based do handle object changes more gracefully than others, that's assuming that the same object is in place, okay? So if the object ID changes, if it changes totally like the functionality of the object, then just knowing that the object has moved is not going to do anything for you. You still got to fundamentally probably recreate that automation and then wait for it to happen again, wait for the problem. Now, here's some other questions that you may want to ask. Is the function easily repeatable? In other words, you kind of get the sense as you're testing it manually that you feel like a robot even testing it. And that's not a good thing, but it's a good sign that, hey, this might be something that would be good for automation. Probably something pretty mundane, pretty regular. You could almost envision giving a set of keystrokes, scripting it, or putting it into a tool. And then is it easily performed? Does it take any kind of complex setup? Do you have a lot of steps to perform the task? There's this issue of having long involved complex test scripts, whether they be manual or automated. And so if you do have that situation, I would also ask, is it possible then maybe to break those scripts up into smaller scripts? That's one of the concepts we teach in our automation framework training, that you want to try to make your scripts functional in nature so that you can combine them in different orders. But once again, it goes back to the idea. Is what you're trying to automate fairly easy to do? Now keep in mind, we're talking about the first things you want to automate. We're not talking about this is totally what you're limited to in automation. But the basic idea here is let's walk a little bit before we start to run. And then there's another question of how frequently is it used, the application it is. Are you using it a certain number of times per day or per hour, per week, per month? Because the return on investment is totally based in how much you repeat something. So then you also want to consider, well, how long does this take to test manually with all the conditions that we want to test? It could be that you have to test this thing once a week and it takes 5 minutes to test. It typically doesn't make much sense then to take about 8 hours or so to try to automate that function. I'm kind of dealing with some extremes here, but you don't want to put too much investment. And the reason I use that example is because sometimes in doing automation myself, I get caught up in the challenge of automating a difficult object. And I hate to admit it, but there have been times where I just wouldn't give up. And I would spend like 2 or 3 hours trying to automate one drop-down control. And I wasn't thinking of the financial implications. In fact, I didn't even charge my client for the extra time on it. I just wanted to know why, this thing was not working. But you want to also give some thought to, how long does this require to do manually? Am I getting anything back in return? So these next couple of slides are my attempt to kind of show where the return on investment might be. I'm doing it from a couple of perspectives here. So in this chart, we see the number of times executed per test. And this is the time per functional execution. So basically, if we execute this test many times, let's say 10 times a day, and it takes 30 minutes per test, something like this, then it's probably going to appear in the range to be a good choice. However, if it is not executed many times per test, and it's a fairly quick test, then it may not be quite so good for your long-term return on investment. You might can get some short-term return on investment there. And please keep in mind, these are just kind of my views of this. Your experience may be different than this. Now, another thing to think about is test frequency. So, testing 5 conditions versus 500 is obviously a big difference. And so let's look again at the number of times we're testing this and the time per test suite execution. If it takes like a day to test your 500 conditions, and each of these 500 conditions could be fed into one script, that would be a good choice, I think, for test automation, as opposed to maybe not so many times over this longer term. So if I'm only testing a few conditions and I do it on an occasional basis, once again, that's not really great for return on investment. Just as kind of a real life example of this, I had a financial services client, a stock exchange client, that they had this fairly simple function. Only took about 5 minutes per condition to test. But the problem was it took the tester all day to go through all the conditions. And so literally, this one poor lady worked 8 hours a day to test this one function every day. So what we did was we did a proof of concept, had a tool consultant come in with the vendor company, and paid them actually a discounted rate, I believe. And within 3 days, everything was automated. We were just looking at it as kind of like a proof of concept. When the consultant left, the project was done. it took then 15 minutes to test all the conditions. And so then she had the rest of the day free. Well, not free to do anything, but she could work on other things. But she was very happy. And not just to be free from just from doing this test, but just from the drudgery of it all, and to be able to work on some other things. Okay, now I'm going to take a bit of a check over here to see if we have any questions or anything. 17 attendees, yay! Thank you guys for being here. So I'm just kind of checking in the chat window here to see if there's any questions coming up at this point. And I don't see any, but I will go back over there in a few minutes again and see if you have any questions. So the issue in this situation was, it wasn't so much that the test itself, the function itself was complex, it was just how long it took to do all the conditions, and it had to be done every day. So another thing to think through about all of this, and this is really how you judge if you've made the right decisions or not. And then I'm going to go back to a few other things, a few other questions to ask. But it's always good to look at your metrics around this. Like, how much time did you save by doing automation? You know, how much time are you saving by doing the manual test versus the automated test? How much time do you need to create the automated test for the first time? This can be a real key too, because when people first start using test tools, you really have to work on the motivating factor. If people start feeling like it's easier to run the test manually first, or just run the test manually completely, they're not going to be so excited, about getting into learning the tool and putting up with some of the hassles around using the tool. I mean, as I often say, test automation is not automatic, and it takes a while to get your environments in place and tools working with other tools. And then there's also this thing, what are you going to do when your tests fail? You have to go in and analyze them, and it's funny because you, as testers, want to see failures, right? I mean, that's why we're testing. We're testing to see if we can break things. But then when things break, if you don't have really good recovery in your script, then you have to go in and start the test over. You may lose a day of testing. So how much effort is it going to take to analyze those failed automated tests? And then here's the biggie. Okay, I've been working with tools since probably about 1989 now. So some of you guys were, in grade school in 1989. One of the constant knocks about test automation has been maintenance. Okay, it's always been an issue. I think it always will be an issue. The tool features to maintain the automation is only one piece of the question. The other part of it is, how do I know what to maintain? How do I know when changes have been made? And then you start entering into the zone of configuration management, okay? And that you realize that automated tests are part of the configuration management package. It's a configuration item, basically. And then one other metric is, how much coverage are you achieving by the automated test? However you're measuring coverage, either by code or by function coverage or by requirements coverage. That's a pretty important thing to report. And to be able to say, for example, that we're able to cover 80% of our functionality with automated tests is a pretty major thing to be able to say. And the other 10% requires creative manual testing. I think is a pretty good balance, pretty good trade-off. I know a lot of people who would love to be at that point. Now, one of these metrics is called equivalent manual test effort, EMTE. And basically, it just asks how much time would it take if you were to do these automated tests manually. And so let's say that you have an automated test that takes 1 hour to run, and you perform that test for 10 cycles. You have the manual version of that test that takes 4 days to run. So your automated test, your EMTE is 40 days. Your equivalent manual testing effort, 4 days times 10 cycles would be the 40 days. And you can compare that to the 10 of automation. So 40 to 10, gives you some pretty good return on investment. Here's another way to see it. From Gerald Mesrose's book on X-unit patterns, which, by the way, is a really great book if you're thinking about getting into the X-unit family of tools. He gives a lot of good background and good information there. But he kind of puts it like this, that you're going to put in a certain amount of initial effort just in building the code, okay? But you're also going to have to put in additional effort to automate the test. And this is where the disillusionment occurs, where you realize that, oh, okay, these tools like X-unit, J-unit, N-unit, and such, I still have to bring the test to them, and code them and test them. So you have this hump to get over in terms of creating the test. But then, by the time you get further along in your project, you realize that I've now got my test created, and now my tests are running shorter. Now I have reduced effort as opposed to just doing all this stuff manually. So see, around in the middle of the chart here where I'm at, I'm still doing a lot of manual testing, even to check out my automated test. This area below the curve is the saved time effort, okay? Kind of like a space, an area kind of calculation. Now, one that would be not so good would be this one, where the ongoing effort really doesn't save you very much. An example of this is where you would have like extreme maintenance going on, and you're always having to add new tests, and you're always having to add new code. You're really not saving a lot in terms of automation because things are changing so much. So if return on investment is based on repeatability and easily obtained repeatability, I'll say, then this is a good way to see how that all plays out. Now, before I get into the other questions, let's go back and check for questions. No questions. Okay. Thank you. Love the topic. Thank you so much for the detail. Appreciate it. I'm getting a message up here that says the meeting audio is currently unavailable. More information, click here. Hang on a second. So I'm going to talk now and just say, can you hear me now? If anyone can hear me, okay, so I'm getting some yeses. Okay, great. Oh, and the error message just went away. Okay. Okay, so never mind. Okay, so here we go. Thank you for responding to that. I never know really what it's doing here. But anyway, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Okay, we're almost done. So a few other questions, like, does the function itself require human judgment for outcomes? If you're testing things that you don't have a really clear oracle for, in other words, a business rule or compare to another point of calculation or a table or something, then you're going to have trouble when it comes to the comparison piece of the outcome. And also, does the function require certain types of creative testing? Sometimes you might need to make kind of a last-minute deviation to go off the scripted path. Those kind of things are very, very hard to script for certain. So those are the things that we typically try to leverage with automation to, do those manually, and then let the automated tools handle the mundane stuff. Another question is, are you looking for new defects? And a lot of people fall into this as kind of a bit of a irony here, little conundrum, that when you get into test automation, you learn that you typically don't discover defects as much as you do confirm the lack of defects. So therefore, that's why test automation is really a good regression testing type of approach. If you want to discover new defects, now there are some ways you can do that with tools. It kind of requires some creative approaches to do that, but it's not going to be by doing the same script over and over again. The thing that you're going to find by doing that will be, once again, the regression type defects where things happen that are the result of maintenance or something. Another question you need to ask and answer is this a new application or is it maintenance? So I was on this project one time, and there were 6 of us in the room, and all 6 of us had written articles, books, had 20 plus years experience in test automation. And the client asked this very basic question, and thankfully the client wasn't in the room when we had our debate, but they asked, when should the automation be created? During the project or after? And 3 of us felt like it should be created probably largely after the application has been created. However, there could be some value before. The other half felt like you need to create it during the project so you're in place right when you need to start performing regression testing. Well, so what that tells me is that there's no definite answer. I mean, when you get 6 experts totally divided down the middle. But here's the thing you have to consider, that any functional change is going to ripple through your automation just like it does your test cases and your test data. So you have to really be careful not to start automating too early. This killed people back during prototyping days. And when we first started building software using prototypes, people would try to do full functional tests and especially automate those tests every iteration. And it was just too much. There were too many changes being made. And so, once again, keep in mind that it takes time to create test automation, and even that can actually turn into a project risk. Now, another couple of questions: who will create and use the automation? Simple capture playback, when it works, as you said, as I say on the slide here, can typically be created by, a typical functional tester. But the problem is, capture playback is pretty fragile. And just about every test automation person I know will agree that sooner or later, you're going to have to start messing with the scripts. So when you do encounter the problems, deeper help, technical help at the developer level typically is needed. So you really have to look to see who's going to be the user of the automation. Now, there is a model I think is helpful where the testers create the test. They provide those to a technical test team who also kind of act as the mechanics and the troubleshooters of the test. And then you also have to ask, well, which phase of testing are we trying to do this? So once again, I think maintenance testing is ideal. I don't think UAT is so good because you want humans testing. You want eyeballs on the screen, hands on the keyboard. System testing perhaps could be a possible win, especially if you have some highly repeatable transactions. If you're doing things like feeding performance testing or security testing, that could also be a win. And I would also say very early, like unit testing, is both ideal and essential. okay, because you can create a pretty good library of unit test automation and have that included in the higher levels of test automation. So you're really not suffering too badly from the impact of maintenance when you start out at unit test automation. Now, will that change? Could that change? Yes, it could. In fact, the context of the slide that we saw with the space at the bottom there of the return on investment, that was all about from the unit test perspective. So yes, you can still suffer from lower return on investment. What's your need for precision? Okay, I say if you're not using tools for regression testing, you're doing pseudo regression testing. You know, one little mistake in your following your script can invalidate the entire test. So if you have a high need for precision of some of your tests, that'd be something good to try to automate. Now, you know, the risk on this, things like medical devices and avionics, automation can help mitigate risk. But there's a big red flag here I have to give you, and that is that what we're talking about is software testing software. So you have to assume that the test scripts will have bugs. I say on the slide may have bugs. I think at some point, just like any software, they will have bugs. And so even the tools, even if it's not the script, the tools can have bugs and do have bugs. So you have to be kind of careful when it comes to testing high-risk things. It's good to not totally rely on the automation for high-risk software, at least in my opinion. Now, finally, the last two questions. Do you have a good way to compare the results for pass-fail? You have to have someone, a source that's non-human to do this, unless you want a human reading every test result. So you need some kind of automatic oracle that you can go and check. And finally, how stable is the function to be tested? So once again, the functional errors that you want to find are going to cause your scripts to fail. But at the same time, they make your test automation difficult because you don't want to totally throw a wrench in all the rest of your tests along the way. And another way to see stability is how often does it change. If it changes quite often, then it may not be quite so good to automate unless the developer is also changing the automation at the same time. So there's caveats around a lot of the things that I've mentioned here. Okay, we have a few questions. Let me see if I can hit these real quickly. Okay. In the market, there is QTP and automation anywhere. Would you please share your view on the pros and cons of both? Well, that's a big question. You're dealing with actually kind of two different issues with those. You know, automation anywhere allows you to set your points of presence, cloud testing, mobile testing, those kind of things. QTP has kind of always grown up in the client-based world, and I'm not saying it can't be used for other forms of testing, but its forte, I believe, is to run basic scripts that are more kind of anchored in a specific application. So automation anywhere is more designed to test from a point of presence that you may define anywhere around the world. That's about the best I can say. Sorry, Rocio, on that one. When test automation makes sense? Well, it makes sense when you can have high repeatability and get your return on investment. It doesn't make sense when you need to do creative testing and testing that requires human input and eyes on the keyboard, as I say. I mean, eyes on the screen, hands on the keyboard. UAT typically isn't a good fit, but unit testing is a good fit. Also, you have to look at your organization. There's been a lot of companies that spend a lot of money on test tools and weren't able to get them to work. So I say instead of buying 200 copies of a particular tool, buy one or two first and try them. And you may find that you can't use them and you may need to go on to another tool. You may wind up with Selenium or something. So, you know, go back and look at the recording and go back and answer the questions that are in this recording, and I think you'll have an idea of when it makes sense. Chris asked, what are your thoughts on using Visual Studio 2012 for test automation? I have a pretty positive view of what Microsoft is doing with Visual Studio. It's constantly maturing. I have several clients that are putting their stake in that ground well, they develop using Visual Studio anyway. The maturity of the record playback and the automation isn't as great as what you'll find with some of the other tools. But the thing about it is that you can use other tools with Visual Studio 2012 like SpecFlow. You can even use Selenium with Visual Studio 2012. So, you know, as far as a platform goes and a test management platform at that, I'm pretty keen on Visual Studio 2012. Are the slides available after the meeting? Yes, they are. I'm going to put them on my blog, and I'm also I'll put the link there. I usually put them up on SlideShare. Anyway, that I believe is about it. I do have to. I'm going to come back see if there's any other follow-up questions. But I would like to just say thanks a lot for being here. If you need to contact me, my contact information is in the slide deck there. I see Katla from India. Please add me on Facebook. I will. All you have to do. Okay. I see you there. I am on Facebook for those of the rest of you out there too. Randy Rice's software testing page on Facebook. Feel free to go out and send me a friend request, and I'll be sure to add you. But yeah, I'll go pick you up there, Katla, on Facebook. And we'll have another one of these probably next month. My schedule looks like it's going to start getting crazy in April, but I love doing these webinars, and I hope they add some value to what you guys do in your testing. So thank you once again. I appreciate it, and I hope you guys have a great rest of the day. Thanks for being here.